Bueno, muy buenas tardes y muy
Good afternoon, everyone, to this new cycle, this series of IICA dialogues, high-level dialogues regarding matters related to the agricultural sector and the agri-food sector. We are broadcasting for the entire world, aside from IICA social media, with a very special guest, in fact, the Director General of IICA, Manuel Otero, and the businessman, agronomist, engineer, musician from Argentina, as well as international consultant, Gustavo Grobocopatel. I would say he is a big thinker of matters related to agriculture and matters in the agriculture sector. A person with somewhat of an unconventional mindset, so unconventional that a while ago I was talking to a colleague, a journalist from a very important newspaper in Brazil that is participating at this dialogue, Mauro Sapalon, and the two of us talking about Gustavo's track record. To describe it, I was telling Mauro that in Brazilian terms, we do not understand him, or we do understand him, but anything he says is very interesting. Gustavo Grobocopatel in his own country, Argentina, was called the soy king and the endless man, the landless man, two categories that would be contrary in Brazil. So with that brief introduction or preface, this shows that Gustavo is a very interesting character. There are all kinds of questions to pose to him, particularly at the crossroads that Manuel Otero will explain. So I believe it is appropriate to have this dialogue, to frame this dialogue from this stance. We are in the presence of an outstanding businessman with so much to say, so interesting, as well as an IICA Director General that one way or another has included in his labor dynamics a lot of thinking, a lot of input for those in the agri-food sector that are mandatory to examine. So I am sure this will be a very fruitful dialogue. So on the table, before I offer the floor to the Director General to welcome Gustavo, I guess the first thing that we all want to hear is some thoughts or comments on the agri-food status worldwide. If we are truly facing a crisis and how Gustavo sees this. That perhaps is the first matter to discuss, but I offer the floor instead to the Director General of IICA, our host. Thank you, Guido. Hello, everyone. I would like to highlight Gustavo Grobocopatel as a profile. He has worked in Argentina, but also in the entire world. So in this Open Door IICA, it is a great pleasure for us to have you here with us today. I would like to go back to Guido's question on the global food crisis. How do you see it? What are some dangers as well as some opportunities? So the floor is yours. Well, thank you, Manuel. Thank you. It is a great pleasure to be here. This truly is a home we feel as our own. The activities carried out, the themes covered. I congratulate you for your leadership here. Well, this crisis is no doubt a major. This is a crisis regarding the supply of grains. Usually these crises have been related to a drought or to weather conditions that we know are quickly overcome. The weather issue overcomes. But in this case, we have no idea of how it will be resolved and when it will be resolved. If you ask me for my opinion, I believe it will be overcome faster than we really think. But oftentimes we make mistakes in the sense of policies and human activities that could make that correction take a bit longer. Prices have increased just to give a signal to growers for them to sow and produce more. The price increase will make prices increase everywhere and very likely in Ukraine, although the war continues. This will become basically a new normal. And we will need to produce under those conditions if the war issue is not overcome soon. The rest of the world, in the meantime, will react by producing more technology. There are two matters that worry me. One is the increase in the cost of inputs. That has a big impact and could cause a delay in the incorporation of technology and the increase in production. And the other thing is that many governments are basically acting in the marketplace by making the price signal not reach producers through price control, maximum minimum prices, limiting imports, etc. So if we prevent that price signal from reaching the producers, we will prevent this recovery from being faster. But it gives me the impression that should be overcome in the short term. In the field, in the short term, a short term really means 1 year. It will be 1 year with problems, but the following year, this will be overcome. In our recent dialogue with the ministers of agriculture, one of the characteristics of IICA and this administration is that some ministers mentioned their doubts in the sense of this being a crisis that could prevail over time. And this is just my personal comment now. I see a certain fatigue. The fatigue after the economic deacceleration in 2019, 2020, the pandemic, and the consequences of the war now. These seem to be cumulative crises. Am I right to put it that way? Yes, you are absolutely right. There are several cumulative crises. One crisis triggers another. Now we see a crisis on in the financial market. We have no idea what consequences that could bring about. Evidently, there is an inflation problem, something very absolutely new to many countries that are not used to it. Access to fuel. Well, I believe that we need to try to go along with this process until the economy readjusts, and it will readjust. Very likely this crisis or the war will not leave things the way they used to be. There are new things that may pop up. The new relationship among countries, matters related to food security, new relationships. There will be stronger ties, very likely, with our raw material suppliers and countries. And there, I believe that Latin America has a huge opportunity. Latin America is a major photosynthetic surface, the largest in the world, for several reasons. First, because there is water, abundant water. There's land. And because there is culture. The people know how to work the land. These three things, all three things do not exist as intensely in the rest of the world as in Latin America, and that is food production. We know that photosynthesis today not only produces food, but also multiple products for construction, for housing, for clothing, for energy, for medicine, etc. The bioeconomy. Allow me to pose another question before the journalists can take part. I would like to ask the soils expert, is the fertilizer crisis as serious? Is this truly a bottleneck for agricultural production in the short term? What is your view? Well, yes, in principle, we have not yet been able to use the nitrogen from the air. That would be ideal. Many places are working on this. We need to add nitrogen, and even more serious is that we need to attract phosphorus, because nitrogen, well, there's a mechanism to partially overcome this using legumes, but this is a cost issue. The input-output product, the fertilizer prices could increase, and there's a new grain price, and there's an input-output economic element in all of this. The curves in economic impact will change at some time. There will be a rationale. The producer that analyzes these cases must consider the price of inputs and outputs and the economic ideal for this. We will not cease to use it, maybe a bit less, but not cease. Precision agriculture, do you think that this part of bioinputs is already on the agenda of research institutes? Well, in this case is where precision agriculture shows biggest advantages. We have to be ever more efficient in the use of nutrients, and this efficiency means finding the optimal for each environment. And bioinputs also. We are headed to a change in agriculture with the trend that we have been observing now for several years. And these processes, basically, what they do is accelerate that transformation. We are headed to an agriculture with more bioinputs, and I believe in about 5 or 10 years, we will have an extensive and intensive agriculture based on bioinputs, biofertilizers, phytosanitary products that are based on bioproducts. We are headed to something very good in my view. Perfect, Guido. I do not want to hog the microphone. No, by no means. No, there are several questions, Manuel. And it is very important for you too to pose these. There is something that Gustavo was just mentioning, and it led me to think of something. Maybe I understood wrong, but you were saying that after this first point in time in crisis, very likely prices may become a stimulus to increase production. So I would like to ask, in your view, what should be the role of governments in this immediate time frame to address this issue? Because we see this as a disparity in measures, and in this IICA has been very active, mapping in all countries and in all continents, mapping what measures are being taken, and there are some that repress trade or by prohibiting exports even beyond Latin America and the Caribbean. Others have launched into local production plans, a local production of fertilizers. And Gustavo, in your view, what should be the role of governments in this immediate near term, where there are so many concerns also about consumers that require food products at affordable prices? Well, what I believe is that governments have an obligation, a fundamental purpose, which is basically to protect those that are more affected by this type of matter. There are people that in view of the price increases, they have no idea if they are going to have dinner or anything to eat tonight, or if they have enough to eat over the next 2 days. So governments have to act by protecting those sectors through subsidies, special pricing, etc. These are offsetting measures or compensation measures, but this requires engineering, sort of like an acupuncture in public policy. There are many governments that directly do not take the time, perhaps out of lack of knowledge, to do this acupuncture, and here they suddenly come with an axe and just tear everything apart. For example, in the case that I know closely, Argentina, at this time, they are seeking policies that subsidize wealthy and poor, those that can and those that cannot, those that have and those that have not. So this is a waste of resources that are ever more limited because regulations, instead of being focused specifically on the more difficult or the more troublesome areas, are spread throughout. And something else important, the raw material component in food prices is ever less. There is a component that has to do with marketing, with freight, with processing. So to think that with raw materials, by tackling raw material prices, we overcome the inflation problem, that is a big mistake. Sometimes governments take measures to show that they are doing something, that they are concerned, but not necessarily are they really addressing the results. And I believe we have to bring together specific mechanisms of assistance for those sectors that are facing a tough time. Manuel, Director General, perhaps you could be the one to highlight the work that IICA took to the recent Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles regarding concrete proposals to reinforce food security in the Americas. A proposal by IICA. You had a very important meeting with the administrator of Samantha Power and she mentioned assistance to vulnerable countries, emergency assistance to countries in the region. So perhaps a dialogue could be developed regarding the proposals related to the Institute. Yes, as Guido said, we were at the Summit of the Americas, and evidently we had the possibility to participate in a series of fora with the private sector, representatives of the public sector also, and there we defended and we continue to defend the severity of the problem by mentioning that food security or food insecurity definitely is at the top of the global agenda. And evidence of this is that there are several countries in the continent that are already launching their national food security plans, tackling, as Gustavo was saying, or trying to generate concrete measures by helping the more vulnerable sectors. I believe this is fundamental. And the other thing we insisted on is that there should be financing available for producers and growers, particularly credit, something which is being discussed in several countries. And the other thing is that related to fertilizers. And here we insist that there should be a tremendous dialogue and public-private partnership and the nearshoring to try to overcome this, knowing that countries like Argentina have a 70% reliance, and in the case of Brazil, it is even more. And the continent there has realized that we do have a bottleneck and that we need to overcome that. As you very well said, we need to find ways out in the near term and the medium term. And talking about medium term, IICA underscores science and technology. There must be, we should think about the national science innovation matters. The other area is inter-regional trade. Interblock trade in our country is only 15%, whereas for the EU, it is 65%, or between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, that is more than 45%. So there we have room to grow based on the political will expressed by the ministers. And additionally, we believe that sectoral policies should be subject to a new generation of policies. And IICA is posing that matters of cooperativism and partnerships and associativism should have a new emphasis, particularly thinking of smaller growers, more vulnerable growers, that amidst all this time of anxiety and anguish to produce more could be left by the wayside. And IICA, in the framework of its dialogue with the ministers, has dialogues and consensus and action as the elements that must be a part of our new framework of policy. So I believe We need to continue working on these policy frameworks that we are still needing for the transformation of agriculture. Yes, what you said about regionalization is very important in our view, and everything that we still have to do. The problems of globalization, in my view, should be addressed with tools, globalization tools. One of these tools is regionalization, precisely. If we want to be significant in the world and have influence and participate in the global political policy, we cannot do it as individual countries. No, we need to work together. In Latin America, a region which is extraordinary in so many senses, we see ourselves as siblings. There are no wars, no struggles amongst countries. There is love, there's recognition one for another, and there is a space where basically there are no barriers to create a large regional bloc that will allow us to tackle the major issues that exist, the food security, obviously, for the reasons I just mentioned, but also with rural poverty and with global warming, with carbon dioxide emissions, and all these things have to do with the rural area, the field, and with the complexity of what is coming on us. The complexity is that there is a new technology convergence that will change the way of doing agriculture, the way of doing business. That convergence includes biotechnology, nanotechnology, robotics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, the Internet of Things, etc. A whole new technology package that will modify rural areas in our lowlands and our mountainous areas and valleys. And it will modify this, in my view, in very positive terms, if we can do it together with public policies that include, that educate, and that generate internal knowledge. As you say, everything you mentioned as elements on the agenda, in my view, must be part of a transformation process we will experience ever faster. The more problems there are, the more turbulence, the transformation process, in my view, will speed up. It does not become neutral, no. And so we need to act a lot faster. Well, the danger perhaps is that if we speed it up too much and if it becomes chaotic, it could widen some gaps. Yes, it could be a tremendous problem, the big problem. The Industrial Revolution, for example, was not the Industrial Revolution. No, society was not prepared for what happened at the time, changing everyone's life. My fear is that what is coming, there is no public debate, no reading on what is coming on us regarding labor transformation. We are not preparing ourselves to change our work. To keep a job will mean changing the way we work. It is not that there will be unemployment. No, there will be more employment, different employment, and we are not getting ready as society. Politics are not giving a response to this for the time being. Politics is only focusing on power and holding power, and the business sector is not moving this forward on our agendas either. The business sector is more concerned with how to subsist. We innovate to preserve ourselves, but not to lead or head this agenda that needs the business sector together with NGOs, academia, and the political sector working all together. Some people mention or pose that with these yellow lights in the globalization process, nationalism, food nationalism could arise, exacerbating the short-term measures. It could be, but what we are learning from all these processes, both the war as well as the pandemic, is that there is an interconnection, a global interconnection, much greater than we ever thought. That is the impact of something geographically negligible, as could be a war, and its impact worldwide is enormous. The impacts of the pandemic are huge, enormous. The response of society to all these impacts, though, is more technology, more innovation, more transformation in an analytical manner, because the speed of those changes is much greater then the ability of our political system to anticipate these changes. So it is very important for institutions like IICA to lead this public debate and to bring attention to this subject matter and try to channel the public discussion. Very good, very good. Manuel, if you allow me, excuse me, I would like to bring your attention to the tremendous convergence between what Gustavo has mentioned and the ICA's agenda as a bridge organization, an entity that is favoring collective action of countries, as an entity that brings together government, academia, private sector, public sector, multilateral credit organizations, civil society. So I would like to ask you both, uh, what idea do you have to strengthen and further accelerate this process? How can we fine tune it and perfect it? Because the agenda that we have regarding future challenges are elements that are present on the ICA's institutional agenda at the same time. Well, yes. See, I believe ICA has the can be a very good interlocutor at all levels, particularly the public sector. There are a few institutions that have this leverage. So I believe that ICA, aside from its own idea, has to be an instrument that brings together all these pieces that are currently working separately. That role that Manuel is heading is very important. It is very important to bring together governments and private sector and NGOs, academia, the labor force, of course, and in all countries with a regional agenda. Sometimes when the agenda is too national, country focused, we could have problems and discussions, but when the agenda is regional, things change a bit. It is perhaps easier and faster to become aligned. There's a difference in interregional blocks, Mercosur, the Pacific Alliance, and integration among those between and among those blocks. How can we articulate this? Well, first by consolidating some sites where we are weak, for example, Mercosur, but with an agenda that goes beyond the crossroads and the governments. We have to go towards macroeconomic convergence. I know it is very difficult to mention this at this time, but if we do not think in the medium and long term, things will never happen. And I believe that when we think of the medium or long term and we are fully convinced and there is leadership and there is hope, then things begin to happen faster, much faster than we could ever expect, because we begin to see a strong a focus on this macroeconomic convergence, the international relationship between and among blocks and the rest of the world, and integration between the Atlantic and Pacific blocks and the link with the United States and with FTAA and Central America, and a place of diversity and wealth and a great potential, a huge potential. For me, that is the agenda that IICA can head due to its track record. Gustavo, there is a third point that I would like to ask you to cover here. I would like to welcome some of our colleagues that are joining us. The IICA's Communication Committee, for example, Cristian Mira from the journal La Nación, Mauricio Bertoli from El Clarín, as well as Mr. Zapalón from Sao Paulo and Juan Carlos Domingos from El Tiempo. But the thing is, Gustavo, is that going back to the first matter, which is the growing food insecurity and the war and the disruptions in the input supply chain for agricultural production. How gloomy is the environmental element in this new scenario after being so strong, after having sustainable agriculture?
I believe that the environmental topic is not a different topic. It is within the body and soul of the agriculture itself. It is not possible to solve any of these topics if this process does not speak the same language of the environment. And also, if it is not a process that includes the social aspect, it is very difficult to generate a process on one side yes, and on a different side no, and to go to different places. I believe this is a ship that goes to one place. Most people must be in this ship. For me, it is not possible to have any decision, any policy excluding the social or environmental aspects. They are part of the same discussion, the same dynamics. And this is what will make the process sustainable in social terms as well. We do have a serious problem, which is that many people are outside the system, not because of an agricultural problem, an industrial problem, or services problem. The change we are going on from a post-industrial society to a society of knowledge, this will happen anyway. But they are coming here because of the dynamics of these matters. So it comes with turbulence and anarchism, which is dangerous because it leaves many people outside, and it is difficult to generate from policy dynamic and speed as required. I believe that Latin America in environmental terms has many things already done. There is a series of challenges as well. But the environmental agenda in Latin America, let's say, included everything related to land ordering in some places, or land zoning. In some places, this has been applied, not in other places. There are some barriers. But this land zoning is key to know what to do, when, and how to do things. It is also related to water. We do have a resource that there is a shortage in the world. It is related to water, so we need some kind of global government of water, or regional government of water. It is also related to emission of carbon dioxide. And in that regard, we have done some tasks in Argentina about the carbon footprint, and it says that it tells us that the results are being quite positive or much less negative than expected. Using this direct plantation, using making a more efficient use of fuels, and with the addition of other type of fuels that are not fossil fuels. But now, having said that, the agriculture that comes for me is quite different compared to the one we're used to. If we believe that we're going to be able to plant with robots, not with robotized tractors, but without tractors, it is a detractorization process of agriculture, and robots that will inject seeds guided by GPS with lithium batteries that are recharged with the sun and air. So we're going to start harvesting sun and air as well. So if we believe that the nitrogen could be taken from air, and that the seeds are coated by biologic products and chemical molecules that make them grow faster, and to sure with nutrition meter by meter. So if we think in all these matters, we think where the producers are going to be and where the operators are going to be. And we believe also that there's going to be a greater demand of data science engineers, or engineers in the development of digital systems, and the people in the different regions of Latin America at the field level. There's going to be data science-based service companies. So we need to be prepared for that through the science and technology, through education, by drawing the attention, because this the state is not the same state that we need. There is a huge agenda where IICA improve having sensitivity towards these issues, and IICA started putting this into the agenda, and probably we need to deepening a little bit more. Can I would like to reaffirm a little bit this IICA's transition. If everything changes, IICA needs to change as well. And now say that IICA has to be a transmission pulley between crisis topics to help building this new vision, which is a disruptive one, particularly related to agriculture that we are experiencing. There is a transition quite turbulent, but in relation to the environment, what needs to be clear is that the new roadmap can only have sustainable agriculture and that upper part of the agenda. Without that, we would miss a huge opportunity. I also admit in our ongoing dialogue with ministers, sometimes I perceive that the topic for today is to produce, and to leave a little bit behind the environmental aspect. And I mean, we can produce more. In the case of direct plantation, Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, in the case we can produce more with more sustainability. This is impressive. I have been repeating the same thing for the past 3 years, but there are many people that have not realized that. It is a revolution in the strict sense of the revolution word. This structure on how to do the agricultural change. In the past, we managed the deterioration. Now we improve soils with the use. And the farmer was a synonym of producer. Now the farmer is the enemy of agriculture. So it is a revolution in words, in facts, effects. I would like to make an announcement here, if you allow me. We are going with everything to the COP27. The idea for us is that it's going to be the COP of agriculture, sustainable agriculture. We're going to work to have a pavilion of agriculture to show all these good cases, to give a message to the world, meaning that in the continent, we have to see the glass full, half full, and we're going to address all these good practices aggressively. Yes, we do have challenges, right? My hope regard is not naive. We have a problem with deforestation. So we need to control this, we need to avoid it, we need to rule it. We have the problem of chemical residues management as outputs. So we need to focus on these matters. So there are 2 or 3 topics in the agenda: the water aspect, direct plantation solve the problem of erosion and degradation, but in some places where there's no direct planting, the erosion and degradation are still core issues. So we have an agenda to entertain ourselves, but we're on the right track, I believe. Thank you, Gustavo. If I may, after such important messages about the regional integration, the first colleague asking for the floor, and the exercise of the question is the colleague Mauro Zafalón from Sao Paulo. He is the main journalist of agricultural topics and sustainability, one of the most important newspapers in his country. He will ask in a language that has a lot of future, which is Portuñol, right? Go ahead, Mauro.
Gustavo, muito prazer. Gostaria de
I would like to take advantage of your knowledge as a producer and that you assess a little bit this time of crisis we are experiencing. You started saying that we are on an offer crisis. My question is, that policy that we are experiencing now with high interest in Latin America, the US dollar exchange rate will continue increasing, and that will cause an internal cost for our customers, mainly for those producers producing food for internal consumption, such as rice and beans. And this has been quite expensive. And those who export soy and corn. If there is an increase on the US dollar price, they get more in local currency. But those working for internal economy, for them the situation is difficult. Do you think that these particular producers from Latin American countries, even having the technology that we believe is being inclusive with all the potential we have in Latin America, and you mentioned that, isn't it possible that they could leave the activity because this equation of cost it is not good for them? Good point. The situation varies according to each country. I was lucky enough to work a lot in Brazil, in Uruguay, and in Paraguay, and in Argentina, of course. And in the the four cases are completely different. I mean, Brazil has a complex structure of the tax part. It is quite federal and different state by state. Brazil has a huge deficit in infrastructure that they are solving little by little, but really slowly. And they also have a problem with the capacity to take people to work, skilled people to work. In the case of Paraguay, this is completely different. Taxes are quite low. There is no tax issues. They have other structural problems and problems or lack of public services. In the case of Uruguay, this country is a country that, because of the macroeconomic policy, is a little competitive compared to others because of the value over evaluated peso. And we know that with the export rights and the rest. When I said at the beginning about macroeconomic convergence region, I'm referring to align all these differences that exist among countries and try to search similar variables with the time, similar taxes that rates are similar, that they derive the cost by the government and taxes as well. So I believe this will take more time, it will take longer. In this particular crisis, there are many things that can be done from the government, both for to supply internal consumption and for the security, and also to produce much more. This price increase is a price, an amazing and extraordinary price increases to raise the imports of all these countries. But for example, in Argentina, there is a case, an amazing case. So the wheat price increases at the maximum worldwide, but they will plant less with this year. Why? Because although they earn a lot of money, all this money earned is not enough to plant the same amount of hectares. So they need to indebt themselves. On the other hand, they talk about threats of increases in taxes. So there's a lack of systemic knowledge of the problem. But this is something that this is a struggle that all of us, that each one of us has to do in our own country. Thank you, Gustavo. Oh, I don't know, Manuel, would you like to anything else to this? Yes, I would like to emphasize that the macroeconomic situation, as Gustavo said, is heterogeneous, and I would like to make a separation and continue between the exporting countries and those that are imported countries of food. And to draw the attention, meaning that the situation is critical in the food importing countries. I'm referring to Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, particularly in the North Central American Triangle, and particularly the Caribbean situation. I'm referring to the Eastern Caribbean countries and Haiti, where the import costs are higher and higher. The Caribbean needs to write a check not less than $6 billion every year. So, and also the lack of opportunities for the agricultural sector. Everything that you mentioned about biological resources of Latin America are not present in the Caribbean. And for the export-import chiefs, they have having some quick wins, but there is also a realistic awareness, knowing that what matters is the margins, production cost, and as Gustavo said, the expected responses are not the ones we expect. So the scenario is complex and heterogeneous. We need to find a solution for that. About the last part you mentioned. Yes, it is a serious problem, but there is also a great potential in these countries to produce foods that are not being expressed. And I believe that governments and multilateral organizations have given a lot of money to agriculture, but very often with a systemic focus, thinking that there was a financial problem or believing that there was a problem of some infrastructure investment and instead of considering other aspects such as cultural aspects, technological aspects, and others. And they have put money, and this has not succeeded. We have not seen any transformation. I believe that very often we put money sort of as social assistance and not as something to transform and generate development. This approach needs to change. It has to be based on studies, on evidence, and great knowledge about the rural areas. I believe that there is a great lack of knowledge about how rural areas work. So that's why this money does not produce the results needed. So I checked some work, but also in Chiapas. But the truth is that there is a lot of to do. I visited some years ago Honduras, and there is an important potential, productive potential, 5, 6 times greater than the existing one. So this situation needs to be changed. And they need to start generating investments to transform the rural areas in Central America. One of the problems, I believe we have contact with Guido. No, the countries assume for awareness when a crisis arrives, and self-supply programs are developed. And then if the situation decreases in intensity, they forget, and transformations, structural transformations are not fully completed. Excuse me, there was different a lack technical issue in the room and those outside the room. I got this question for Gustavo Grobocopatel. They say, in Colombia, we have a serious problem of generational change. And Gustavo, as an entrepreneur, as how do you face this situation? So to avoid this more serious in the future, you have to rent the rural areas to old people, to senior people. Colombia is a country that I really love. I know Colombia as a tourist, but I work in a place in Bichada and in Meta. There is a million of hectares that could be used for agriculture in those places. We carried out a very important task for the government of Mr. Santos at that time. And I keep some friends, but most of these recommendations are in the library of the Ministry of Agriculture. They are not considered for transformation purposes. So the elements are there. They are not important investments. So we need to start working on that. And I see the same situation in other countries, even in my country, in Argentina. So we work with so many things. In my case, I provide consultancy, but I'm not a consultant. My consultancies are quick results, economic results, but those tasks are done and they stay in the library, or we decide to fund projects that are sort of social subsidies and they that do not transform. So we are doing wrong. If the crisis is useful to draw the attention to the governments for them to start changing the way to generate these development programs, welcome crisis. Okay. And from the Jalisco state in Mexico, important journalist of the agricultural sector, Hugo Castellanos, would like to ask you a question, Gustavo. Good afternoon, and thank you, Guido, and thanks to General Director Enrique. Thanks to Gustavo. A pleasure to be in contact with you from Jalisco, Mexico. This generation change is a whole issue. It transcends the situation in some countries. It is a continental issue. I believe it is a global aspect. The question is aimed to how to interact the motivation for the new generations. Thinking in the food activity, how to motivate the innovation and develop a complex scenario of food insecurity and of a food crisis, which is very close, starting from the situation, all of us, how to involve young people, how to promote innovation, and how to put all this together in a complex context like the one we have now. Thank you. Pleasure to meet you. I believe that young people will get involved more as long as their development of the rural areas generate challenges, labor challenges, human challenges, everything related to technology. Digitalization is calling young people to work. What I said that we need to rent the land to senior people is like it's as if I was kidding, but it is based on a conceptual strength, very important. We need to make a change of in managing the agricultural aspects. This change does not necessarily imply a change in the ownership of the land. It can be done through outsourcing mechanisms, renting mechanisms. I believe this. We need to leave this to happen. We need to leave the creation of technology companies, service providers, to decouple the ownership of the land and management, and to the management see young people with other skills to carry out the transformation process I mentioned. I want to say something. I believe that, well, in my accumulated experience in all these years in technical cooperation, we have always tried to build elusive walls to stop the exodus from rural areas to the cities. So with new marketing strategies and looking at this agriculture intensive knowledge, you have insisted on what we have to do, even with more strength, is to attract the new generation from urban areas for them to see that the new agriculture is a field of opportunities, right? This is happening in Argentina. I see this process going on. In Brazil, happens less because the ownership of land and real estate business is still closely related to production. But as soon as this becomes separate, things starts improving because more young people get involved. Gustavo, General Director, another colleague, Christian Miller from La Nación, requested the floor. Hello, Guido, Manuel, Gustavo. How are you doing? Can you hear me? Perfect, loud and clear. Okay, greetings. Gustavo and Manuel, I would like to ask you, one of the recurring topics, or one of the recurring problems in the region is the access to funding. And Gustavo, you described that there is a big opportunity, and particularly in transformation, the transformation agriculture is experiencing towards a better inclusion of technology. How do you think this funding way could be improved for this new agriculture? I mean, pointing more and more to sustainability. Maybe this is not the right time to think about this because there is a financial crisis, a global financial crisis. But how do you view, once this is over, how do you think the process could take place? Hi, Christian. I believe that there is an opportunity in the fintechs. And what fintechs are trying to the funding systems, the traditional ones. In the case of Argentina, there are several companies that are working with grains tokenization or that are working with virtual wallets. I mean, in Argentina is a particular case. There's no capital market. People do not put their savings in a bank, and we are seeing a growing and increasing phenomenon related to fintechs. I believe I have a great illusion with that. Even traditional banks, they are already investing in fintech. They are starting getting their own products. Technology companies, free markets. The Wallap has a bank on its own. Santander is working hard, Superbill as well. So traditional banks are working hard with this fintech aspect. I believe this will generate a new circuit in money, and it also generate the capital markets much more dynamic than we have seen so far. My hope, I have a big hope, meaning that this will help a lot. Hi, Christian. Hope you're doing well. You're absolutely right. If you take the picture we see in the loan portfolio, I'm referring to international funding. So the international funding institutions, we see a dropout in the relative importance of agriculture within these portfolios. Maybe what we need to do is a new sale, much more aggressive of agriculture. I insist intensive in knowledge agriculture, so to go on the side of sustainable development, of bioeconomy, or a systemic view of the local development. So we need to stop insisting on these traditional views of agriculture and to become the marketing of this agriculture. All of us need to help in the transformation process. Recently, we held meetings with the Vice President of the World Bank, the President of CAF, and all of them are interested in seeing how countries give these new steps in relation to food security, sustainable development. There are going to be many opportunities there.
Thank you. And if you allow me, from Argentina, I would like to, Mauricio Bertoli, our colleague from Clarín, has a question. Mauricio, go ahead, please. Hello, Guido. Hello, Gustavo. Hello, Manuel. It is a pleasure. Greetings to everyone. I believe it is interesting for Gustavo to reinforce something that was said in the sense that new technologies and digitalization, that in the framework of the pandemic has grown even more, will lead us to think of a new internal migration within countries and more federal developments and the possibility, for example, to work elsewhere. Not necessarily do we have to live in that same site. This could deconcentrate urban areas that has been so troublesome in the Americas and could lead to other types of development models. Yes, yes. Hello, Mauricio. Absolutely right. Many areas, rural areas in Latin America, were totally disconnected from the rest of the world. Valleys, mountains, highlands that were totally disconnected from the world. And the fact that they are now connected and now we can work off-site opens up an opportunity we did not count on before. We generate investments at major investment sectors, that is one thing. And having digital controls, virtual controls on the operations that are located elsewhere. One of the problems we had in agriculture was this disconnection in locations, and that is why we say that there is so much work to do. We cannot, we could only be on the site where things were happening. Basically, well, we must keep an eye on everything. Now we are headed to an opportunity where we have to learn to tap it throughout all Latin America. I believe that countries, as Manuel was saying today, have a food deficit, if we can call it that way, can now produce a series of products they could not produce before. They are more connected to the world. They can have more exports. And I am currently in Costa Rica, but this applies to Central America. We see the fruit, the juices, the thousands of ways of making coffee, as we see in Colombia. That has to be explored further. We have to see more production, more products with brands on them. And I believe that well, today here we have IICA. It was a very interesting discussion to have an entrepreneurial center in Central America to build these smaller companies, these startups. I believe that ever more entrepreneurs will be the ones to save the planet, but I am absolutely convinced of this. And entrepreneurs, I do not mean a public sector only. No, not only am I talking about private sector, but also public sector. As a civil society, we need to try to ensure that these state-based entrepreneurs assume leadership, to break away with those structures and barriers. And we will come across a surprise. People particularly with fewer resources, if you make things easier for them, if they can start to look at what it means to be an entrepreneur or a creator of their own fate, we will be open to a big surprise in Latin America. I am fully convinced that there will be an entrepreneurial revolution here, and I believe America has the big opportunity to be the birthplace or at the area with agricorns, if we can call them that way, in this new world. And we break away with this linear division between urban and rural, and adding to the concept of delocalization, as we have called it before. Gustavo and Manuel, we are running out of time. I would like to thank the large number of people connected and for their participation. And I would like to, and before I offer the floor to the two of you for closing remarks, and since a few moments ago we were talking about the tremendous convergence between what Gustavo mentioned and what IICA does, I would like to mention another common point, another area of convergence that I would like to highlight with in presence of such a geographically diverse, but as at the same time similar audience. Gustavo sings very well, and he has a folk group in Argentina, Sur. I don't know if they still have performance Crudensur. But not long ago, I read an interview by Gustavo in a journal, and he said, if we had a society with a more artistically focused, I am sure that we could have a much better dialogue. So with this, I would like to highlight an initiative, an IICA initiative that the truth is not major, not negligible, but is very important within the Open Door IICA. Understanding this reality and the agriculture laboratory and the typical house and CIMAG, the Center for Interpretation of Agriculture tomorrow. We also have a virtual museum here with a lot of our artwork coming from rural territories in the Americas. So I would like to highlight that other commonality between what Gustavo feels, thinks, and what IICA is doing. And with this word, I offer you to the floor to end. All I can say is that hopefully Manuel can start singing soon, as soon as possible. And then we can even have a much better dialogue.
Nada más, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I feel very privileged to be here with you today. I would just like to thank Gustavo once again and reiterate the importance of this type of dialogue to build the future and to have a hopeful lookout for our continent, a young continent, a continent of peace with a lot of green, and where agriculture represents an expectation through down a joint path in favor of sustainable development. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Con mi amigo, el gran artista Alberto Rojo, dedicamos esta samba ya lejos y hace tiempo a los trabajadores y emprendedores de las llanuras, de los valles, de las montañas, de los montes, de los ríos, que trabajan arduamente para proveer de alimentos a todos los hermanos de América Latina y el mundo. Felicitaciones, IICA, por la iniciativa.
Muy lejos del sol, vuelve el recuerdo de allá. Siento en tus ojos brillar el azul soledad de mi tierra natal. Siento en mis ojos brillar el azul soledad de mi tierra natal. Susurra el viento y se va, enloqueciendo el color, y es la nostalgia un adiós de amapola y torcas, mariposa y gorrión. Y es la nostalgia un adiós de amapola y torcas, mariposa y gorrión. Allá lejos la patria andaba, azulando el día, cielo allá, tiempo allá. Vuelvo niño al asombro del sur, y por mi sangre una voz maternal nombra la vida. alza su sombrero ombú, poncho de la inmensidad. Y es mi lejano país una dulce raíz que no sabe olvidar. Y es mi lejano país una dulce raíz que no sabe olvidar. Frente a la bruma y el mar, la lejanía es un adiós. Y se me da por pensar que el recuerdo de allá se me ha vuelto canción. Y se me da por pensar que el recuerdo de allá se me ha vuelto canción. Allá lejos la patria andaba, azulando el día, cielo allá, tiempo allá, vuelvo niño al asombro del sur, y por mi sangre una voz maternal nombra Argentina.